The United States of America is lying to you. For years, they have claimed to stand for democracy, human rights, and the protection of sovereign nations. They presented themselves as the defenders of freedom, the ones who would stand up against oppression, and the force that would ensure justice prevails in the world. Nowhere was this more evident than in their support for Ukraine. When the Russian Federation invaded Ukraine in the year 2022, the government of the United States of America led the international response. They imposed severe sanctions on the Russian Federation, provided Ukraine with billions of dollars in military aid, and pressured European nations to stand against Russian aggression. They called Vladimir Putin a war criminal, labeled the invasion an illegal occupation, and vowed to stand with Ukraine for as long as necessary. They told the people of Ukraine and the people of Europe that the fight against Russian expansion was a fight for freedom and justice. But now, everything has changed. With Donald John Trump as the President of the United States of America once again, and James David Vance as his Vice President, Washington has completely altered its stance. The same government that once condemned the Russian Federation is now speaking of negotiation. The same leaders who pushed Ukraine to fight are now telling Volodymyr Zelensky that he is gambling with World War III. They have abandoned the aggressive stance they once held and are now subtly shifting sympathy toward the Russian Federation. Overnight, Ukraine has gone from being a priority to being a problem. And this should come as no surprise, because this is what the government of the United States of America has always done. They use allies when it serves their interests, only to discard them when their focus shifts elsewhere. They do not care about Ukraine, they do not care about Europe, they do not care about justice or human rights. There is only one thing the government of the United States of America truly cares about: Israel. While Washington reconsiders its support for Ukraine, its support for Israel remains untouched. No matter how many war crimes Israel commits, no matter how many innocent civilians are slaughtered, and no matter how many international laws are violated, the government of the United States of America will continue to defend Israel at all costs. Jewish historian Ilan Pappé has spent his career exposing this hypocrisy. In his latest book, he lays bare the truth that the world is beginning to recognize. What is happening in Palestine is not a conflict between two equal sides. It is not about self-defense. It is a systematic colonial project, an attempt to erase an entire people from their land, backed by American weapons, American funding, and American silence. For decades, the government of the United States of America has shielded Israel from accountability. They claim to stand against occupation, yet they support Israeli expansion. They claim to uphold human rights, yet they protect an apartheid regime. They demand that Ukraine fight against Russian occupation, calling it illegal and unjust. But when Palestinians resist Israeli occupation, they are labeled as terrorists. When Ukraine fights against a stronger military power, they are praised for their bravery. When Palestinians do the same, they are condemned. When the Russian Federation bombs Ukrainian cities, it is called a war crime. When Israel bombs Gaza, it is called self-defense. Now, the same American government that once urged Ukraine to fight is telling it to surrender. Just as they ask Ukraine to compromise, they continue to ensure that Israel never has to. This should be a wake-up call for all of Europe, because the truth is, Washington never truly cared about Ukraine or the people of Europe. They only cared about using them for their own agenda. And now that their interests have changed, they are abandoning them without hesitation. For years, European nations have followed the lead of the United States of America. They imposed sanctions on the Russian Federation, cut off energy ties, and sent weapons to Ukraine. But where has that loyalty gotten them? The moment Washington's priorities shifted, they turned their backs on Ukraine. And if they can do this to Ukraine, what makes any European nation believe they will not do the same to them? Meanwhile, Israel continues its assault on Gaza with full American backing. The same government that now tells Ukraine to negotiate will never ask Israel to do the same. Because for Washington, there is no such thing as justice. There is only power. But the world is waking up. The protests, the boycotts, the growing outrage, it is becoming impossible to ignore. More and more people are beginning to see through the lies, to question the narrative that has been force-fed to them for decades. The truth is becoming harder to suppress. So now, the question is not just about Palestine. It is not just about Ukraine. It is about everyone who has ever believed that Washington stands for freedom. Because when the truth is finally undeniable, when the hypocrisy of the United States of America is exposed for all to see, what side will you be on?